Hey there folks, I'm Hammurabae, and in this video I'm going to be giving you an updated and much higher quality economic tutorial for Millennium Dawn. My goal is to have you be able to understand how the mechanics work in a reasonable time frame. Let's get started. Economic principles in HOI4 itself are almost non-existent. This is a war game designed to simulate military conflicts, which, let's be honest, is probably why you're here. Mods like Millennium Dawn transform the base game into something more, and we will cover the basic principles and what is added by the mod. In terms of the most basic sort of things to understand, your factories dictate your economy in HOI4. Civilian industry in base game is the sole metric for private industry and I guess kind of GDP. Civilian factories can be used to either build more buildings or to trade for resources you need. In Millennium Dawn, they're still the only thing that constructs anything else, but are not the reflection of economic value. All buildings including civilian industry, military factories, naval dockyards, and office complexes generate wealth, which is actual money in this mod. Of course, they are not made equal. For tax values comparatively, you can see here in this graphic the difference for each building type. Office complexes are by far the best, but do nothing other than just generate corporate tax, whereas dockyards give the least. They are all significant though, with each one still giving you some form of income. The other ways you have to make money are population tax, which is generated based on your total population, meaning it's absolutely amazing if you're China, but non-existent if you're Monaco. You also make money off of resources, though you have to explicitly be trading them actively to another country to get any income. All are similar besides precious metals, which is a little bit higher, and oil, which is way higher, in order to represent the fact that oil-producing countries make exorbitant amounts of money off of trade. Lastly, of course, there are international investments, which each get a 6% return on investment annually. We will cover all these in detail as we go. This is to give you simply a frame of reference. The place you will see all this information on is the economic screen, found in your political menu, construction tab, or by just clicking your treasury at the top of the screen. This menu is very important, so getting used to it is very key to enjoy Millennium Dawn. Your GDP is a combination of your nation's produced value, of any sort, which is into factories in the mod. Modern nations see this as the key metric for a country's success, which in many ways it really is. GDP per capita next to it is the wealth of an individual person on average in a country, meaning it's your total GDP divided by your population. This is another metric seen as indicative of a country's development, but in reality, it fails to almost ever actually achieve quality of life predictions of individual wealth due to rampant wealth inequality in the modern world. GDP per capita is important because it has a lot of effects on your game mechanically in Millennium Dawn. Low GDP per capita is useful as it does give you a higher population growth rate, as well as increasing construction speed, poor countries being generally easier to grow in. And what high GDP countries gain in comparison is research speed and stability, which you get more of as the metric increases. Your population tax rate dictates income off of your population as a whole. As I mentioned before, its use is dependent on the population size of your country. If you are small, keeping it low is very useful, but if you have a ton of people, you will likely need to raise it fairly high if you want to maintain a large military and governmental expenditures. Your corporate tax rate is your tax on business and industry. In Millennium Dawn, it is the metric for your tax cost, which in vanilla HOI4 is what percent of your factories, specifically military and civilian, are unusable. It was their use to provide private industry and civilian goods, but in Millennium Dawn it represents taxes paid for by private entities in your government, limiting what they can do the same way as in vanilla. To the right, you can see the amount of each factory type you have. This is where your office complexes actually appear, as they are not added to the factory count at the top of your screen. For your economic projects, we can separate them into two different groups. The first three allow you to pay a small amount to temporarily gain access to 3 civilian factories, military factories, or dockyards. If you are a small developing nation, the second one is what will make your nation develop quickly. It gives you incredibly needed construction capacity at an acceptable cost. The next 5 all give an increased construction speed to a specific type of building. These are really strong for growth, but also very costly. Do not underestimate the cost. For expenses and income, you have a breakdown of all the various costs and income, the latter of which I've already mentioned. For the other portions, let's go over them right now in detail. In Millennium Dawn, All military divisions deployed cost money, as do equipment in stockpile and deployed, ships, planes, etc. One very important thing to note is that your GDP per capita affects this massively. A high GDP per capita country has a much more expensive military to reflect the cost of quality, whereas poor countries pay much less. Below is a detailed list of the various costs of equipment, ships, and division quality costs, which you can use as a metric. I put a little chapter marker here on the video, so you're welcome to come back to it and look at it in the future if you'd like. It is very useful. When it is not used in your stockpile, equipment has a cost of only 1/4 what it does when deployed, so that's interesting to keep in mind. Military costs directly are based on battalions, not divisions as well, which is important to note as size does obviously have a difference. If you want to rid yourself of excessive costs, consider destroying old equipment you don't plan to use, or better yet, send it to a country that you like and generally want to become stronger, though of course they do need to be at war. Your officer training laws also affect military costs generally, with the higher quality ones adding 5% increased cost per level. Conscription laws also add a ton of cost on top of things, so keep an eye on that when changing these, or consider them as options to get rid of if you need to cut costs. If you play long enough, you will eventually hit a cap on the number of buildings in all of your states. This means you can either start to switch them out, aka convert civilian factories to military factories, or replace them entirely with something else, or you can wait for more. The manner in which you get more building slots is either your focus tree, for which many countries have way more advantages than others, or your population, which is dictated by the state's total amount. This screen here gives you a list of the building slots given by population universally. So if you want more, you have to reach this amount. So how do you do that? In terms of how to grow your population to reach these levels, it's easiest to do as a poor country, as GDP per capita will slow it down by a lot. And I mean a lot. Beyond that, you gain more from high levels of governmental expenditure of health services and social spending. Prohibiting women in the military also gives you a boost, in addition to having the farmers, priesthood, or clergy internal factions. Your governmental policies are the main way you will spend money. The bonuses obtained are substantial. If you want to play with a bit of realism and not immediately rush the best ones, the game will probably be enjoyable for longer. This list here shows you clearly the differences in base cost, meaning education is the most impactful by far, whereas bureaucracy is not. These are all based almost entirely on your population size, so having them for massive countries like China means each level will come with considerable costs. For direct economic use, education spending gives construction bonuses, which is useful, while health spending reduces tax costs, meaning you get to use more of your factories, offsetting the effect of the corporate tax rate. Higher administration laws decrease construction speed, so despite the nice political power boost, it's a pretty negative one to take high levels of. Trade in Millennium Dawn is the same as vanilla, except you get money off of the good being actively traded, with oil being the best by far. Trade in vanilla is frankly just garbage, and one of the features I'd always hoped they would expand upon, which they never did. As such, it's best not to expect too much of this, as even late game, where some more trade does happen, it will really all be for technology metals, which are used in late game equipment types, and there's not enough of them in the world, as well as rubber. In terms of what dictates who the AI trades with, it's based off of the opinion of the country and the trade opinion modifier. Trade agreements, national spirits like EU member, distance, as compared to convoy cost, all factor in here, but generally, it's not the most impactful. The biggest thing to keep in mind though is your trade laws, which allow you to focus more on domestic use or exports, in theory. More export-based laws give you advantage of decreased tax cost, allowing more factories to be used, more income on exports, and more of your resources being available for trade. Keep in mind, being available to trade means you cannot use them, even if they're not being bought, which chances are they're not. The best of these are really the consumption and semi-consumption economy laws, as they have an increased trade opinion modifier, making the AI more likely to trade with you, while also allowing you to keep the majority of your resources. The market cycles of your government dictate the current status of its markets, and economy generally. For context, think about the current state of your nation's economy right now. Is it doing well? Are goods cheap? Jobs easy to get, and things semi-stable? Or interest rates really high, spending low, jobs hard to get, and times just generally really tough? Every country is different, though in modern world economies, which are so connected, they tend to be very similar generally speaking. The cycles in MD reflect this and have major effects, as well as plenty of events in-game that will happen as the game progresses. Low levels massively decrease tax revenue and stability, as well as killing construction speed. High levels give you much easier building. In order to go down or up a level, it costs a lot of political power as well as money directly, so going down a few levels to depression is very hard to get out of. Corruption is a pervasive and dangerous thing, which once it gets its claws into a country is very hard to remove. More than anything else, it's a cultural thing, with nations which have it for long periods often struggling or finding it impossible entirely to remove it. In the old economic tutorial for those who watched that I made for Millennium Dawn, I talked about how mechanically it did have a major advantage of giving more political power, which is no longer the case. Now it's just straight up bad. Decreased taxes and lower stability are the largest things to watch out for among many others, which you can see just by hovering over it. To change it, you have to spend a lot of political power for each level. Debt is gained in Millennium Dawn every time your treasury goes below zero, in a governmental deficit, or you have to spend money you just don't have. It's not innately a bad thing, especially for governments, as in the modern world, investment is the lifeblood of capitalistic economies. Spending allows the nation to create more jobs, industry, quality of life programs, etc., which are all useful. Debt gets bad when it goes out of hand, and specifically, the interest rates contribute a large portion of expenses, taking away money from needed programs. I missed the 90s. In Millennium Dawn, you can see at the top of your screen your total debt amount in red and your treasury in yellow. Hover over the debt button to see your current interest rate. Generally, I recommend not going over 8% if you can help it, but at 15% is when things get really bad, including in-game events and a full-blown debt crisis which is in the game mechanically, so best to avoid unless you want to roleplay the United States properly, which is commendable. Millennium Dawn has a system for international investment, which is the standard practice in the modern world of companies and governments allocating funds to develop industry in other countries. Often used as a diplomatic tool, the most common reason is really cheap labor to exploit developing countries in order to maximize profits. It's an amazing system, unless said country overcomes their situation and holds it against you later. In order to invest, click on the state in the country you intend to invest in. At the top, you will see the investment screen. Naturally, you can always invest civilian industry, but in order to do military factories, you'll need the military industrial complex faction, or for dockyards, the maritime industrial one. The reason for an investment is really useful, is that all money spent gives you a return of 6% every year, which you can see here at the top of your screen. Let's say you invest 100 billion into another nation. This means you get an extra 6 billion every year, which isn't going to be crazy, but is a consistent and solid source of income. Investing also gives you influence on the country, seen here in the political menu by right-clicking a nation. AI nations will invest in you as well, which is very random. In order to make yourself a little bit more viable, you should focus on having high relations with big investor countries like the US, have a lot of infrastructure in your states, as well as lowering your GDP per capita, as higher GDP per capita countries are less likely to be prioritized. If you want to properly enjoy this system, you have to play with other players, as they are the ones who will properly give you investments before leveraging them against you and making you beholden to them diplomatically. Check out the roleplay server I run for Millennium Dawn roleplay games if you are also an economic masochist. Research slots are not based solely on economics in Millennium Dawn. If you go to your decision menu and scroll down, you will see the menu for them. Research slots are now gained based on your total GDP, which you can get, of course, by just building more factories, and GDP per capita, which is the same, but based on population. It's just your GDP divided by your population, with more, of course, being gotten by your GDP itself, as seen here. Once you meet the required levels, simply click the button. But do note, and please listen here, that it costs a lot of money in proportion to your GDP, as well as also increasing your education costs. Always check that you have enough beforehand and consider the effects. The slot becomes available 90 days after hitting the button. This concludes the economic tutorial for Millennium Dawn. I hope you enjoyed it, and what I covered will help you enjoy the mod, which is in my opinion really the best in Hearts of Iron 4. This mod is at its best with other people, so try and get some of your friends into it, or make some yourself, for example by joining the Millennium Dawn Discord itself. Also in the link in the description. I have more tutorials for Millennium Dawn covering military, politics, and plenty of other topics, which I have pinned in the comments. If you want to watch Millennium Dawn gameplay, I also have a lot of series on my channel, though do note they're all in the roleplay format, so they're more realistic rather than metagaming. I also stream on Twitch. Catch y'all later, and I hope you enjoyed.